open the Bible this morning, and we're going to be in Matthew chapter 14, if you want to get there in your Bibles already. I'm aware that we have been in a series around the armor of God, and we've not completely parked this, but we've had a number of visitors recently that I wanted to give the freedom for them to come and speak into the life of the church and to share around Hope into Action and the different visitors that we've had. And I didn't want to restrict them into the series that we've been doing. But I wasn't meant to be preaching this morning. It was meant to be Samara. But on my way home last Sunday, I really felt that I needed to speak today. And I asked Samara just to change some things around. But we will come back to the armor of God. We're not done with it. And we will push into that series. I wanted to thank you for gifts. For cards for our birthdays, my birthday this week, Samara's birthday a couple of weeks ago. You're very generous, very kind to us, and for those of you that wished us happy birthday, we had an amazing time in the city of Rome and just enjoying a few days away together. I needed another holiday after I got back because I walked literally thousands of miles. When we landed in the city and we got the transport to where we were staying, from the point that we landed at our hotel, we didn't use public transport for the whole of the rest of the time that we were there, and literally walked like 25,000 steps a day all over the city. But Samara chose a brilliant location. We were very central and we were able to move around the city, and I would highly recommend it if you've never been there. Just a few bits to mention. Great to have Sandra back with us this morning. I was thinking about putting her through the newcomers course because kind of almost forgot about how she looked. And with much joy of seeing faces, there's always sadness. I've been to see Richard twice this week. Ian popped in to see him yesterday. He's been very ill these last few days, and he's now on end-of-life care. Do be praying for Richard. Do be praying for the family. They're very much in our thoughts, and I will update you on that situation as it unfolds. It's also Mary's birthday today. She's going for afternoon tea later on. She's kind of played it down because it's not really for me, it's for the afternoon. Tea is for Jess's baby shower, but it's her birthday, and we celebrate you, Mary, this morning and all that you do, and we're so grateful for you. Happy birthday to you. Come on, strike us up, Lenny. You want a microphone? Look at him. Do you want a keyboard as well? No? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday,
dear Mary. Happy birthday to you. Hip hip. Hip hip.
Wonderful. I apologize to those of you that are watching online that I have just deafened, because this microphone, if you sing through it online, it becomes very, very loud. So I apologize to those of you online this morning. And next week, we're going to be sharing some news about some leadership changes in the life of the church. So can I please encourage you to be here next Sunday morning? If people aren't here today, get on the phone to them later on today and say, there's going to be some leadership changes and they're going to make some announcements next week. Do your best to be in church with us next Sunday morning as we update you around some leadership changes as we head into 2025. This morning, Kelsey's not around this morning, and it's amazing what Kelsey does behind the scenes that you forget when Kelsey's not here. So Samara says to me, I think we need to buy milk. Yes, we need to buy milk. Kelsey's not here, and I just nipped down to the corner shop and I picked up some milk for us this morning. And as I walked in there, the guy that lives in our Hope into Action house was there, and I was able to connect with him. And then the owner of the corner shop called me, and he says, can I ask you a question? And I was thinking, oh, is he going to take me deeply theological, or is this just going to be an open question? And he says to me, I've been given some free stock from some of our suppliers, and we need to give them to charity. And I was just wondering whether you would be able to have some of this stuff from us to bless your kids' work and your youth work and all of that stuff. So we're really grateful, aren't we, that there's people like this that are watching what we're doing and are celebrating with us all that we are doing. So we'll look forward for more of that in the days and weeks ahead. I want to talk to you briefly this morning from Matthew chapter 14, and we'll also dip into the account in Mark. But Matthew 14 is where I will focus. And I want to talk to you from the title of Life Outside the Boat. And we read these words. Immediately Jesus made, in the New Living Translation, it says that he insisted the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever read this chapter before, and often we skip over little verses like this. We get to the fun part where they're walking on the water. But I want to kind of spend some time here this morning thinking about that little phrase where Jesus made or insisted the disciples get into the boat to go to the other side, while he stayed behind and dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside by himself to pray, and later that night he was there alone. And the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves, because the wind was against it. A bit like me this morning as I walked on, going down to get a coffee this morning. I was like literally at one point like this because the wind would not allow me to move. Thankfully, I wasn't on the sea. But it was a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went walking out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." In the New Living Translation, I've been using the New Living Translation for my personal devotions this year, and it says this: I am here. I am here. Take courage. I am here. "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down from the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. And he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith." Just pause for a moment there. He's just got out of the boat. He's just walked on water. I know nobody else that walked on water. You of little faith. Why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." When they crossed over from the land to Gennesaret, and when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent out word to the surrounding country. People brought all their sick to him and begged him to let the sick just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. Here we've got the account of Jesus walking on the water, and it follows in both the account in Mark and the Matthew, the account of the feeding of the 5,000, where Jesus fed the crowds with the 5 loaves and the 5 fishes. And I want us to kind of just think about this first verse that we read together this morning around Jesus making or insisting that the disciples would get into the boat. You see, I wonder what was happening in some of those disciples' heads as they were trying to row across that ocean that morning or that night. As they were going, I wonder whether they were thinking, well, Jesus made us. He was going to stay behind and clear off the crowd, and he made us get into this boat. You see, blame becomes really simple when we want to pass the blame to someone else. But you see, certain storms are unavoidable in our lives. And sometimes when we're in the storm, when we're in the boat and we're rowing what feels like we're rowing against the wind, we need to stop and we need to ask ourselves, what is Jesus trying to teach me? You see, are we prepared to be students of the storm? What is Jesus teaching you and teaching me in the midst of the storm? You see, I remember a storm that Samara and I found ourselves in at the butt end of 2019 and the early 2020. And if I'm honest with you, I didn't see it coming and I didn't expect to be there, but we were there and we found ourselves in the midst of the storm. And during this season, I live around about 4 miles away from the city of Leicester, but I would often take a little walk until we were restricted by COVID. I would often walk into the city and have a coffee there. And I remember walking one morning and I'd not got too far away from home and I was praying and I was talking, and if I'm honest with you, I was probably complaining. I was talking to the Lord about my storm and how I just simply wanted to be the other side of it. But you see, when we go through the storm, the Lord is teaching us something in the storm and He's needing to take us through the storm to teach us what He needs us to learn. And as I walked this day and I'd not got far from my home, the Lord took me to that verse in Job, and I wasn't even thinking about it. I'd not even read it, but the Lord spoke clearly to me and He says, I am taking you from the jaws of distress to a spacious place with a table laden with choice foods. And here's me, I'm complaining and I'm chuntering, and the Lord has just told me what He's doing. He's taken me from a place where I've been, and He's trying to get me to a place that He needs me to get to. But to get me to the place that I needed to be, I needed to become a student of the storm. You see, I wonder, let my mind just go a little bit this morning about how Jesus made or insisted the students get into this storm. If we think of Jesus being the one with all wisdom and knowledge and knows all things, He knew exactly what He was sending His students into that day. He knew what the disciples were going to encounter. But He sent them into the midst of a storm. And He stays behind and dismisses the crowd. I don't know about you, but when you get to a position of leadership where you're maybe Jesus, maybe you leave the disciples behind to do the dismissing of the crowd. And maybe you go off, because we read in a few minutes, He goes off and He prays. He didn't even need to go ahead. He could have said, well, there's going to be a storm for the next 24 hours. I'm going on the mountainside to pray. You dismiss the crowds and we'll make our way in a little while. So Jesus takes some time out praying, and as I was preparing this over these last few days, I want to say to you again this morning to make sure that you're taking time to pray. Not just when we come together on a Saturday evening or a Sunday morning or a Tuesday morning. But let's make sure that you're taking some time out to pray for yourself. I love corporate times of prayer. But Jesus wants us to spend some time alone with Him. And here's Jesus setting the example of going up on a mountainside and praying. I used to love going up the mountain when I lived in South Wales, and Ian and Noretta would know a place called Aberdare where I ministered for many years. I would drive up the mountain. I wouldn't walk it. I would drive up the mountain. I would sit at the top of it, and I would look over the town that I was serving, and I would pray over it. And I would see some things from that view that I didn't get to see on the ground. And we need to come up higher. We need to elevate our position so that when we're praying and when we're looking down on it, we can see. And Jesus finds Himself on this mountain and He's spending some time with the Father. But when He's on the mountain praying, the disciples are still visible in the boat. The whole time that the disciples are there rowing against the wind, Jesus is sat in perfect peace, praying to his Father. I want to say to us this morning that he's always watching. In the midst of our storms, he's always with us. He never leaves us. He's got an elevated view and he can see all things. But Jesus knows that certain things can only be learned within the storms. In Mark, we read in this account that he was about to pass by. In Matthew, we read that he went to them. You know, sometimes in our everyday life, we miss Jesus. He passes by our lives, our situations, and we miss him. We miss him because we're too consumed by the things that are happening in our lives. We miss him because we're not looking for him. He walks by us and we miss his presence. But you see, God's timing is designed to teach us to trust. The New King James Version, the King James Version tells us that on the fourth watch of the night, between 3 and 6 o'clock, just before it gets light, they've been out there all night, pitch black, rowing in the midst of a storm, completely visible by him. And sometimes we want Jesus to step into our situations quicker than he does. But he's watching, and he's teaching, and he wants us to learn something within there. I don't know about you, but sometimes I say to him, Lord, it's time for you to come. And he says to me, but you still got something else to learn. He's always on time. You see, when we're trying to get out of the storm, he's trying to get you through the storm. He's trying to get you through the circumstance and the situations that you find yourself in. You see, what you and I are looking for is relief. We just want out. We're uncomfortable. We don't want to live this way. But what he's trying to do is he's wanting to bring us revelation and direction in our life. That if we just go through the storm, we may just be stronger because of it. But just because we do not see him, just because he doesn't appear to be present in our circumstance or in our situation, he is watching you. John Ortberg, in his book, If You Want to Walk on Water, You've Got to Get Out of the Boat, said this: Mark tells us Jesus intended to pass them by. But when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. Why did Jesus want to pass them by? Did he decide to race them? Did he want to impress them with a really neat trick? Garland points out that the verb parachomai, to pass by, is used in the Greek translation, the Old Testament, as a technical term for a theophany. These defining moments when God makes a striking and temporary appearance in the earthly realm to select an individual or a group for the purpose of communicating a message. Let's take a couple of examples. God put Moses in the cleft of a rock so Moses could see while my glory passes by. The Lord passed before him. God told Elijah to go and stand on the mountain, for the Lord was about to pass by. There is a pattern in these stories, Ortberg goes on and says. In each case, God has to get the people's attention. And in the midst of our storms, he is trying to get our attention. through a burning bush, through a wind of fire, through walking on a water. With each person, God was going to call them to something extraordinary in each situation. The person that God called felt afraid. But every time that the people said yes to their calling, they experienced the power of God in their lives. And I want to say to us, People Church, this morning that the Lord is calling us. Jesus is coming to us. And when he comes to us, he speaks his peace into our fear. He doesn't necessarily take you out of it, but we can know his peace in the middle of the storm. We can cry out to him from that place of fear, and we can receive his peace. We can hear his voice. I am you. Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Ortberg continues. So when Jesus came to the disciples on the water, intending to pass them by, he was not doing a neat trick. He was revealing his presence and his power. And only God can do such a thing, for he alone treads the waves of the sea. You see, in Mark's account, we don't get to the piece where Peter walks on the water. It says that Jesus got into the boat and the storm subsides. And some of us like to live that way. We like to think that Jesus is just going to get into the boat and all the things around us is just going to be all right. But Matthew's account tells us that Peter replied, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you. You see, Peter had doubts. You and I will have doubts. He didn't say, Lord, I see you and I'm coming. He said, Lord, if it is you, if it is you, tell me to come. Are we living in a place of doubt? Are we unsure about the things that God has done or the things that God has said? Are we questioning some of the things that we've heard in our lives? But the deepest things that the Lord says to us, sometimes the most simplest. Jesus says to him, come. Come. And the question from me to you this morning, are we so comfortable in the boat now that Jesus is sitting in it and we've found some peace, or are we just ready to get out and walk on the water? You see, often when we're in the midst of a storm, we want Jesus to give us all the details. We want Jesus to give us a 10-point sermon how to get out of it. And yet, he gives him one word. He said, come. Come. Will you just come? He gives him direction. He doesn't give him details. I don't know about you, but this is true in my life. When sometimes I just want the Lord to give me the details. Just says, Lord, Rob, will you come? Will you just take one more step of faith? Will you walk? Will you hear my voice? Will you follow after me, even in the midst of a storm? He wants to give us direction. He wants us to take some steps of faith. Are we more comfortable with Jesus in or us out of the boat? And you see, both are important. As we'll see in Matthew's gospel in just a moment. And I want to say that I'm amazed by this story. How he gets out and how he walks on water. How he takes that step of faith. Accepting Jesus' invitation to step out of the boat. Jesus needs water walkers. He's trying to get us out of the boat to go to places that we've never been before, to walk in directions that we've never seen him do things before. But you see, he saw the wind. Have you ever seen wind? I saw the effects of the wind this morning. But it tells us that he saw the wind. Can I say to you this morning that I don't think Peter got out of the boat and just took a couple of steps and walked on the water and got scared. I think he walked quite far. Let me tell you why in my thinking. When they had seen Jesus initially, they couldn't see him. They thought he was a ghost. They didn't see him. But by now he could see him. Because his response wasn't, save me, but it was, Lord, save me. Whatever had been in the way of his distorted view, his view was opened. And he could now see his Lord. And he knew that he could save him. Jesus was close enough to reach out and catch him. It then got me thinking even further. Because if Jesus was far enough away that he couldn't see him, how did they hear him when he called him out of the boat? And I just wonder whether the thing that was the storm that they were struggling against, the wind, just maybe carried the voice of Jesus into their situation for them to get out of the boat, to walk towards his Jesus. You see, some things that are against us can help us hear the voice of God. Because we hear him more clearly in the midst of a storm. Because when everything is well and rosy, we miss him. But in the midst of a storm, he's able to come to you and he speaks his peace. And he tells you to come and to draw near to him and to receive all that he has for you. In the same book, John Ortberg writes, Dale Bruner notes that according to Holy Scriptures, human extremity, our edge, the limit of our life, the fringe, the end, is the frequent place of meeting God. He wants your attention. He wants to speak to you. He wants to spend time with you. These are divinely appointed moments where he comes to us and he just wants to speak to you and to I. That experience that I talked about earlier that we went through in Leicester. It was our edge. This week we sat with some friends and we reflected. God was good to us. But he needed to take us through it. I wanted it to end. But for 2.5 years, we journeyed. We journeyed. We journeyed. We remembered the faithfulness of God in our lives in the midst of the storm. You see, we can't escape them. As followers of Christ, when we come to know him and follow him, he doesn't give us a bed of roses. But he does promises that he is with us in the midst of our experiences. And Jesus firstly reassures us that he's with us and that we're not to fear. And then he calls us and he tells us to come and he tells us to keep following after him because he's got something extraordinary on the other side of the storm. And if you're not looking for him in the midst of your storm, you will just miss him. Peter saw the wind. I've seen the effect of the wind, and he cries out and Jesus hears him. And Jesus is waiting for you and I to cry out. And at the opposite end of our storm, there are miracles. When we see the effects of the wind, we will be afraid. But Jesus is present and he wants to catch you. I want to say to you this morning, we have a good catcher. We have someone who we can depend on and trust in and know that he's going to be there to catch you in the midst of your storm. And even when we're far away, he comes to us and makes himself known. Is our testimony this morning that Jesus has caught us time and time again? If so, why do we fear so much? Why is it that we have such little faith in these moments? Why is it that we doubt Jesus so often? But you see, I love the account in Matthew. Because in Mark, Jesus gets into the boat and the storm goes away. But in Matthew, he's needed to get out of the boat. He's needed to live outside of the boat. He's needed to spend time out of the boat, walking, following directions that Jesus has given him. And then he catches him. And then we read this. And then they got into the boat together. They got into the boat together. You see, there was a decision that he wanted to go, to walk to him, to go near to him, to draw closer to him. And in the midst of his fear and his lack of faith, Jesus catches him and gets into the boat with him. Jesus wants you to take some steps of faith. He wants to get into the boat with you when you've seen the wind, in the midst of your fear, in the midst of your doubt. He wants to get in the boat with you. It's a picture of trust, a picture of stepping out, but a picture of knowing that he's with us. Because when he gets into the boat, peace gets into the boat with you. With you. Because sometimes Jesus gets in the boat and we don't even know he's got in the boat. We miss him. We still live in a place of fear. But when we get in the boat together, when we've been out on the seas, when we've rowed hard, and we get in together, we know that there's a new sense of peace when Jesus walks in. See, in Mark we read that they were completely amazed, yet they didn't understand. But in Matthew, we see that those in the boat stopped, and they spent some time worshiping our Jesus. In a few moments' time, we're going to do the same. In the midst of whatever storm you're going through this morning, in whatever he's taking you through, even though we do not understand, we're going to press in our worship and in our response to him. Whatever you're going through today, Jesus wants us to get to the other side. Remember, Jesus made them get into the boat. The purpose of them getting into the boat was because Jesus wanted them to go to the other side. And when Jesus puts you in the storm, in the midst of a boat on the middle of the sea, the purpose is for you to get to the other side. You see, but too many of us give up. Too many of us quit. And we miss out on the miracles that he wants to do in our lives, the purpose that he has for us. But what if this morning, not the if of doubt, but what if there is miracles and purpose for us on the other side of the storm? And whatever you're going through today, he wants to get you to the other side. And the reason why he wants to get you to the other side is because he's going to use you to get others to the other side, to find the purpose that they have in him. You see, when we were going through that situation in Leicester, the Lord needed to do something in us, because our time was done in Leicester, and he needed us right here. And I want to tell you this morning that I'd rather have not gone through the storm, but I'm so glad that I did, because we find ourselves sat in the purpose and plan of God for our lives this morning as we just trusted in him. There was disappointment. There was lots of fear. There was so much doubt, but not one moment did we forget the faithfulness of God. And when we recognize Jesus, it says that they recognized Jesus had got to the other side, and they sent out word to everyone around them. And for most of us here this morning, we've discovered this Jesus. But if you're sat here this morning and you don't know him, I want to tell you that he loves you. You've weathered some storms, but he loves you. And he wants the best for you. He's got plans and purposes for you, and he wants to take you to the other side of finding him. We've witnessed Jesus as we've stepped out of our boats. We've seen our circumstances changed. As we step out in faith, we've seen miraculous provision of healing and miraculous provision and healing in Jesus. He wants us to recognize who he is. I said it earlier. He takes us to the edge because he wants to reveal his power. And he wants to reveal his presence. And just like here in this account where the joy of miracles on the other side of the lake, where people came and touched the edge of his garment and was healed. I want to say to you, we've got thousands of these flyers. Step out. Someone needs to be sat here this Christmas to hear a message of truth, a message of hope, A message of truth and hope that we once heard and accepted, and it's changed the trajectory of our lives. We're believing for a miraculous Christmas. We're believing for people to find faith. We're believing to see the baptism tank opened on many occasions next year. We're believing for your friends, your family, your colleagues to discover this Jesus that we know, and they discover their purpose. They find their freedom, and they go on and make a difference. Jesus wants us to be water walkers. He wants us to recognize his presence. It takes eyes of faith to recognize that Jesus is present. Has God been trying to get your attention? He wants to do something extraordinary in your life. Who, me? Yeah, you. Ordinary you and me. With an extraordinary God. When we say yes to him. He has always and will continue to do extraordinary things with ordinary people. And all we have to do is be willing to leave the ball. We're going to stand together. I've said a lot. I often do in these moments. But why don't you take a moment and just ask Holy Spirit what he's saying to you?